So welcome everyone. My name is Tiziana Cervesato. I'm the Director of Events of the Italian Cultural Center of Minneapolis-St. Paul. I'm very happy to welcome you here today for this new series of 3 appointments of Il Salotto degli Artisti, dedicated this time again to discover a lesser known Florence, but also to go and meet international artists who live and work in Florence. We are delighted today to welcome Justin Randolph Thompson, a new media artist, cultural facilitator and educator, and as well co-founder and director of Black History Month Florence, as well as Angelica Stepken, director of Villa Romana in Florence. This series is presented in partnership with the Rochester Art Center and curated by Giulia Angeli and Zoe Cinel, as well as promoted by our promotional partner, Global Minnesota. Giulia Angeli is an art historian living in Florence in Italy. After graduating in early modern art at the University of Florence, she moved to Bologna, where she earned a master's in iconography of Renaissance Italian painting from the University of Bologna. Her research is focused on late medieval and Renaissance Tuscany, a rich and fascinating field where beauty cannot be separated by craft techniques. She works at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, municipal museums, and she's a licensed tour leader. Originally from Florence in Italy, Zoe Cinel is a curator at the Rochester Art Center in Rochester, Minnesota, and an interdisciplinary artist. Her work has been screened, exhibited, performed nationally and internationally in venues such as the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Walker Art Center, the Gibney Dance Choreographic Center, Festival della Creatività, among others. Zoe is also a member of the artist collective Carry On Homes, who advocate for bringing immigrant stories to the public through art and social engagement. So as I said, the presentation will last for about 45 minutes, and then we'll move to the Q&A. This presentation is being recorded for your information. And yes, it is my pleasure again to welcome Angelica and Justin, as well as Zoe and Giulia, and I will give the floor to them. Enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Tiziana, for the introduction, and thank you to the Italian Cultural Center for sponsoring this program in collaboration with the Rochester Center. So Giulia and I are excited about this second series of Salotto. Just like the first series in fall 2020, this spring 2021 series has the goal to connect artists and gallery spaces in Florence with the Minnesota international audience. So before starting, we'd like to ask this question to our returning and new audience. Who knows what Salotto means in Italian? And you can type your answer in the chat. So we thought about a living room as a place, because in Italy is a place where family and friends gather together and share stories and space. So once a month from February, this time to April, we will meet with a different artist and gallery space working with the most diverse media and techniques. And our focus is again Florence, because we want to give the sense that it's a vibrant place where many artists work with traditional and new visual languages. This time we have a lineup of international artists who decided to call Florence their home. And today we're here with Justin Randolph Thompson, who's originally from the US, and with Angelica Stepken from Villa Romana, which is one of the oldest residency for contemporary art in Florence. So without further ado, I will leave Giulia to introduce Angelica and Villa Romana. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, for introducing the project. And let's start with Villa Romana. Villa Romana is a place of contemporary artistic production and international exchange in Florence. Every year, Villa Romana has granted living and working space for the fellows and plugged them into a network of international guest artists. Founded in 1905, so very long ago, by artists and patrons of the arts to provide a platform for independent exchange, Villa Romana is currently run by a non-profit German association supported by artistic cooperation and membership. Villa Romana is a unique, dynamic, and committed interface for artistic production and intercontinental dialogue between Germany, Italy, and the entire Mediterranean region. Cultural differences and personal biographies are networked in cooperation with the regional environment, such as museums, art academies, universities, and partners in other disciplines. And as Zoe said, today we are here with Angelica Stepken, director of Villa Romana, and I'd like to start asking Angelica to tell us about the history of Villa Romana. So when was it founded? Where is located in Florence? And what is the main focus of your programming?
Yeah, thank you very much, Giulia, and all the others for inviting Villa Romana to participate in this kind of transatlantic meeting. Maybe I start immediately with some images and then talking about the history and what we are doing and listening to your further questions. I hope it will work. Is this okay now? The image?
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just little slides from the very beginning of Villa Romana, but it gives an impression of how much time has passed by since then. And Villa Romana, as Giulia said already, was founded in 1905, so 116 years ago. And it was not by chance, but in this period in Germany, there was a strong wish from the artist side to self-organize and to talk also in public about their interests and their needs. It was a time when the government in Germany at that time was still quite repressive, and there was no place for contemporary art, let's say. And in difference to many other foreign institutions in Italy, the history of the villa was never connected to any, let's say, national representation. So it was artists saying, we wish to have a place for production and exchange in Italy. Italy at that time, of course, was very much connected with the antiques, with the Renaissance, with the light for painting and so on. And it was mainly Max Klinger, quite well-known artist from the beginning of the century, together with patrons and other artists who found this old villa constructed in the middle of 19th century in Florence. And they preferred Florence to Rome because prices were cheaper here. Florence around 1900 was a place for international also art historians. A lot of British but also American art historians stayed in Florence. It was also a center for the art market of the very young nation of Italy. So Max Klinger bought the villa, and there is a beautiful exchange of letters where he says how he bought it, which lawyer he asked for help, how he found the furniture, and so on. And at the same time, the Villa Romana Prize was initiated. And since then, but of course with an interruption of 2 long World War periods, Villa Romana is dedicating the Villa Romana Prize usually to 4 artists. And these 4 artists stay in the building for 10 months. They have a studio, they have an apartment, they are living more or less independently, so there is no obligation to participate or to do or to prove anything. They are completely free. Here you see just the view entrance door towards the garden. The villa is situated close to the center, but outside of the city walls. So maybe it's a 10-minute walk to, or even 15 minutes to reach Ponte Vecchio and the very historical center. Yeah, these are some views from events we had. I must say the very special thing of the villa and the quality, which enriches very much the practice of everybody living and working inside, is the garden around. The villa is surrounded by 1.5 hectares of garden, which we kind of reinterpreted during the past 10 years with French paysagist Atelier Les Balteaux. We tried to keep it, let's say, as natural as it was. We didn't add anything. We just tried to open it much more, to move in the garden, to use it, to create relations between the garden and the building and the neighborhood and the city. That's another season in the garden. So we have olive trees and all the beauties of Tuscany. Here you see how far away is Duomo. And we also have temporary architecture in the garden, the pavilion. This is already the 2nd edition done by Claudio Nardi, a Florentine architect. And that's a space which we can use for meetings, for concerts, for everything which does not fit in the main building. At the moment, there is the exhibition of Alexis Peskin in the pavilion, which is part of the Black History Month, so Justin's project. I don't know, now it's not moving anymore.
If you click once on the screen, maybe it will work.
No, everything is frozen. Oops, just a second. No, everything is frozen. I can't even move the. Am I back again?
For now.
Yeah.
Does it work again?
No.
Now?
No.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
No, no problem.
Would you like us to share the presentation for you?
Maybe I just let's try again.
Okay.
Now it's there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So
I mean, this image is already a first image of probably the next question. So about villa. Yeah, maybe I said everything basic.
Okay, so let's move to the second topic of this part. It's about the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea has historically been an area of exchange and encounter among many cultures. And nowadays, it feels entangled with the politics of nationalism, migration, and borders. And so, can you please tell us more about Dialoghi Mediterranei, which means Mediterranean dialogues?
Yeah, with pleasure. Maybe I should first say something else or add something, because I mean, Villa Romana is mainly a residency for the Villa Romana fellows who stay here for 10 months. But what is quite special for this residency is that parallelly we have a kind of curatorial program. We have exhibitions, we have symposiums, we have screenings and so on. And when I arrived here, I mean, until then, Villa was mainly concerned with Italian-German dialogue. And this dialogue is so much always about the same questions or the same projections from north to south and from south to north, that I really didn't want to follow it. And I mean, the Mediterranean, Italy, seen from the north, is the kind of first approach to the Mediterranean country. My intuition at that time was also that maybe I could understand Italy better when I compare it to other Mediterranean countries and cultures. But at the same time, it was also the wish to introduce new views, new considerations on what we call the cradle of Renaissance, the base of modern Western culture. And I mean, all artists have been in Florence, either during school time or later with the Art Academy. But a lot of artists from the southeastern Mediterranean countries were never able to come here because of visa, because of money, for several questions. So I was interested what young artists from Egypt or from Tunisia how they would deal with this historical past, which is not theirs, which is in a way also part of a kind of colonial history. That was one aspect. And then, yeah, I mean, mainly it's this. At the moment, we are also kind of summarizing our Mediterranean dialogues in a new website, which probably will be launched in a couple of weeks. It's called The Broken Archive. And that's was also an interest in the Mediterranean, that there has been so many exchange traffic in the past hundreds of years. But because of this division between, let's say, modernity, comfort zone in the north and conflict zone, crisis in the south, also all this common or conflictuous history is more or less forgotten. So the sea is more or less a sea of oblivion. And what you see on the image was one of the many projects by Ferra's publishing practice. It's a group of 3 young Syrian artists, designer, librarian living in Berlin. They have also studied in Germany, so they have never been migrants. And they started, for example, a research about the publishing houses in the Middle East and the MENA region, which was a starting point for an ongoing research about this region in relation to also the Cold War, interest in the region, exchange, and so on. Maybe, no, it's again stopping. Okay, that was part of the same exhibition. That was another exhibition. I mean, it was not only Mediterranean, but going down to Kenya, but it's about an Italian artist, Sarenko, who already in the 80s had his studio in Kenya and was collaborating with local artists. And he was quite important also in terms of art market to create an exchange between African Kenyan artists and the Italian European market. And I must say, I found these sculptures, which have also been exhibited at the Venice Biennial in 2001, by chance in the deposit of a Florentine collector. And we were very happy to show them again and also remind all the history behind. That was another project by Uriel Orloff, dealing with, let's say, French-Senegalese relations. He himself is a Swiss artist living between London and Portugal. So it was against about the so-called South and its relations to the so-called North.
So, please.
No, I just wanted to know if you want to know more about this subject.
Maybe for now we can just we can learn more about this picture you are showing, which is really, it's amazing. And maybe after, if there is any other curiosity, we can ask later. I think we have time at the end. Because this is a picture showing Sky by Sonia Elizabeth Barrett, installed in one of your galleries last year. And this is part of the partnership between Villa Romana and the Black History Month Florence. So I'd like you to talk about this partnership, and so as a way to move on later to Justin.
Yeah, maybe that's a bridge, because usually Justin should know much better about it than us, because he was the one who proposed Sonia's work to the pavilion, as he did in the past years, always in this collaboration between Villa Romana and Black History Month. For Sonia, as far as I know, it was a kind of new step to work with what you may not recognize immediately, to work with hair, with natural and artificial hair. And she installed it in this transparent place in the garden, which has almost no walls, just windows. And it's a cloud of clouds. And I mean, this photo is very beautiful because the clouds outside on the sky are passing by, and she understood this installation also as a kind of non-objectified blackness, a kind of flow of clouds, which is not static and which does not give a static metaphor to anything. And at the same time, she connected it as well to, let's say, climate issues all over the world, and to the idea of a global nomadic culture. So it was a very, we have another photo. It was a very strong installation with a complexity of meanings within Black History Month and as a solo show.
Thank you, Angelica. I hope that, you know, if the audience has questions for you to know more about Villa Romana, we have time later for that. And hopefully by the time that we can freely and safely travel again, people will be able to visit. But let me introduce you to Justin Randolph Thompson, who's a new media artist, cultural facilitator, and educator born in Peekskill, New York in '79. Based in Italy since 1999, Thompson is the co-founder and director of Black History Month Florence, a multifaceted exploration of African diasporic cultures in the context of Italy, founded in 2016. Thompson is a recipient of a 2020 Italian Council Research Fellowship, so congrats on that. A Louis Comfort Tiffany Award, a Franklin Furnace Fund Award, a Visual Artist Grant from the Foundation Marcellino Bohin, 2 Foundation for Contemporary Arts Emergency Grant, a Jerome Fellowship from Franconia Sculpture Park. So for people who are based in Minneapolis, you can go and see Justin's sculpture in Franconia. And an Emerging Artist Fellowship from Sources Sculpture Park, which is in New York. His work and performances have been exhibited widely in institutions, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Centro d'Arte Reina Sofia, and the American Academy in Rome, and are part of numerous collections, including the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Museum Madre. His life and work seek to deepen the discussion around social cultural stratification and hierarchical organization by employing fleeting temporary communities as monuments and fostering projects that connect academic discourse, social activism, and DIY networking strategies in annual and biennial gatherings, sharing, and gesture of collectivities. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how it was for you to adapt to live in Florence and to such a different country and culture coming from the US?
Yeah, first off, thank you to all of you for the invitation to be here. It's really great to take a moment and sort of reflect together. And it's a special honor to be with Angelica Stepkin, who has been sort of a partner in crime for many years now around Black History Month, Florence, and has been someone with whom I've shared many dialogues around work, activism, and everything else. I think, you know, moving in 1999, I was a student when I moved to Florence in 1999, and I came directly from Knoxville, Tennessee. And so my real objective in leaving Tennessee was the same objective that I had in going to multiple schools each summer which was to find new teachers, to learn new techniques, to learn new perspectives and approaches. And I think that in that, it was almost like an easy win in that, you know, by leaving the country, it's natural that you encounter new perspectives, new teachers, new techniques and everything. But I think that, you know, arriving in Florence in '99, there's a lot of things that I think happened quite naturally that I did not foresee. And I think that especially when it comes to thinking about the sort of cultural realm in which I was raised, where you know, the kind of dialogue that happens around Afro-diasporic cultures is something that's sort of ingrained in me from my upbringing. And so to move here and to find all of these other ways of being Afro-descendant was sort of magic. It's interesting that Angelica was talking before about Tunisia, and some of the first people I remember spending time with in Florence were Tunisians and Malians that I knew very little of their countries. I knew very little of their histories, but they were some of the first people to really embrace me in this context of Florence, and really to sort of completely flip open something that I thought I was going to find in this space. And so, yeah, I mean, it wasn't really much of an adaptation in that I think that one of the things that was really, really clear is that I did not want to be associated with the vast majority of students that populate Florence, many of which I now teach, because the kind of engagement that those students were involved in the city had very little to do with actually experiencing this city beyond its facade. They you know, in our, like in the US and the culture I was raised in, you say they drank the Kool-Aid, right? And so basically all those students drank the Kool-Aid and saw Florence as this Renaissance city that you could go and have fun in, whereas I didn't drink the Kool-Aid. And I really wanted to sort of engage in the meanings that this city had to provide, the layers. And I think that a big part of that is that I didn't dive straight into the romanticism of walking through museums. And I felt a strong personal rejection towards museums because of the ways in which those spaces were narrated to me. And so it took me quite a while to get over that narration and to understand that we all have the capacity to narrate. We can all tell stories. We can all interpret. We can all transform history. And so, yeah, that's sort of my first impact and approach to being in this city and to thinking about what this city means for me as someone coming from the United States, and then also I think for others as well. Really sort of understanding the ways in which people saw the city, understood the history of the city, interfaced with the city, and then also the ways in which Italians saw themselves and the ways in which Italians saw Americans, right? And so there's all these layers that are happening at the same time that I think were really formative to my own perception of the city, my own perception of the place I was coming from. And, you know, it's fed me ever since.
Thank you. I wonder, like, how much of this, you know, personal exploration of the city, that it's not the one that it's like fed to you by the media, I would say, right? Kind of played a role in like the foundation of the Black History Month Florence. And so if you want to talk a little bit about what the Black History Month Florence is and tell us about past projects and the current Ostinato edition for 2021, which is an ongoing programming, and we will post in the chat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I can, just because I prepared a few images, I can share with you some of the stuff that might help to sort of give a visual to some of the work. I decided that instead of narrating in a more explicit and direct way some of these connections, I thought it would be helpful to take one. Yeah, I make many different kinds of work. Organizing and activism is just one kind of work that I make, but they're all coming from the same place. And so I thought it'd be helpful to look through the lens of video and performance-based video specifically, because performance-based video is this space that I use to do research, or that I use to explore spaces, histories, and all of that. And so I'll share just a few images with you, if this works, and try to walk you through it. I think that worked, right? And I will do this, and that worked too?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'll just show you a couple images that I think are really helpful to getting into a mindset of Black History Month, Florence, and some of the ways in which complexity is really needed. So Black History Month Florence was created to combat sort of a flattening of a perception of Afro-descendant peoples and cultures in this country that I found, especially in the last 15 years, have been really, really defined and advanced by mass media quite explicitly. And what happens is that the entire narration of Afro-descendant peoples and cultures tends to come through the lens of a conversation that is very contemporary about migration. And what this does is it undermines all of the ways in which Italian colonial history in Africa, all of the ways in which Roman expansion into Africa, all of these things are just part of the territory of Italy and have always been. And so some of the work that I was making, this is a still from a video piece that was actually, it is a video piece, but it was created as a research piece. So I asked permission to the Ethnographic Museum in Florence to go in and do some research. My research was sort of performance. And it was specifically in relation to this mannequin that you see here. This mannequin represented the resistance to Italian colonial invasion in Eastern Africa. And what I fell in love with was a number of complexities. One is the way in which the armor that the figure was wearing, which was collected on, it's like the label said, this armor was collected on the battlefield where this army resisted the Italian expansion and lost. And so there's this narration of loss. And then there's the actual objects that were collected from dead soldiers that are shown to us as a sort of example of cultural heritage. And so the complexities of how we can twist up the meaning that an object holds inherently and the ways in which we can move away from the sort of ritual transformation that happens when people are creating armor. And then the layer that this is armor that's made from fabric. It was quilted armor. And so this quilted armor is something that was designed to protect from spears. And of course, it didn't protect from guns, and it certainly didn't protect from the kind of chemical warfare that the Italians were engaging in. And so I think this is a piece where I was sort of mending this space between me and this figure. It was this moment of looking to this really explicit representation of colonial history and an attempt to re-narrate that history and to think about the words that we couldn't exchange with each other through the creation also of all of the anger of that figure in the mannequin. And some of the anger that in that moment specifically, like 2005, 2004, was perceived as African-American culture, because the African-American culture in Italy in that moment happened through hip hop very, very explicitly. And people like 50 Cent were narrating for us. So people were looking to 50 Cent to tell them what Black people were about. And that is pretty damaging, And so I was really interested in that language. The piece is called Show Your Teeth because it comes from a Sicilian protest song called Malarazza. This song basically is the prayer of a person who's being oppressed to Jesus on the cross to save them from their oppression. But the thing that's really magical about it is that Jesus's response is to get a stick and show your teeth. And so it's like Jesus is actually calling this person to, defend themselves. And that was sort of like this magical transformation that really connected to an entire legacy of oppression and made some sense out of me being in this place, made some sense out of me being in front of this object and the significance that the object carried for it. And I'll show one more thing that sort of walks into Black History Month that I think is really important, and that is just the political terrain in which we find ourselves in Italy in any moment. But I think particularly in about 10 years ago, the ways in which Italy was being narrated from a political standpoint was very much by taking advantage of a crisis, a migration crisis, which involved a lot of people who were dying in an attempt to arrive, actually not in Italy, although that might be the perception, but to arrive in Europe, right? And the geographic factor that Italy and Lampedusa is so close, right? and the historical colonial legacy with Libya that allows certain relationships to happen. All these things facilitated this conversation. And these are posters that are quite simply posters that are advertising. I think that might be Berlusconi's poster there, Niente sconti di pena, right? That's probably Berlusconi over there. But just these sort of political posters and the ways in which they're framing, in this case, right through them, I was looking at this triumphal arch and the language of domination, right? And so this language of domination, when we think about migration, is something that was really driving my work and my vision. And it was part of the spark that said that some other perception of Blackness needed to be here, right? So if we understand, the arrival of Black people on boats that can barely make it across the water, right, as an invasion, from the standpoint of people who actually go with guns and chemical warfare to invade, it's really a twisted up language that I think needed a lot of untangling and unpacking. And I think that it needed some forms of resistance that only collectivity was allowed to do, right? So it was about bringing people together and talking about all of the different ways in which Blackness and Italianness are not opposites, and that those histories are absolutely entwined. And it's about the lack of recognition of those things that we really need to be dealing with. So that's some of the stuff. And this is just a little teaser of some of the ways in which this stuff sits in plain view, right? This is at the top of the triumphal arch that you were looking at. And it's actually a reference to the monument to the Quattro Mori in Livorno, which is celebrated for having been sculpted directly from the slaves in the port. In this particular case, this is an African man chained to the top of a whole bunch of trophies of war. And a lot of the work that I was doing at the time with this was about reversing triumph. It was about, what does it mean for me to walk backwards through this arch and to carry some stuff with me back, right? Where would I be going? What would it mean? And then it's also all the ways in which I think an arch like this was really attempting to flatten history in and of itself through a really fake discussion of continuity. So this is the Lorena-Asburgo domination of Florence and the celebration of their arrival, but it's littered with imagery that's actually coming from ancient Rome, pagan gods, things that they were not connected to in any way, other than through the language of invasion, conquest, violence, right? And so there's this really explicit language that's being placed right in front of you and remains there because everything is created to be permanent. And I think that I felt that a lot of people were just not looking at what was sitting right there in plain sight. And I think that that's a lot of the work that we've done here, is to just examine what's already here and what has always been here. A couple more images of that. I don't know if you wanted to lead into, there was another question I think that you had.
Yeah, well, I think, it's really interesting to think about this work being done such a, the other side of the ocean from the perspective of somebody that lives in the US at the moment. And I see a parallel in like the most recent history of the US, and even particularly like in Minneapolis and St. Paul, like thinking about this summer where like last summer, when like there have been colonial monuments that have been kind of claimed back by communities who do not identify with the violence that some of those monuments might represent. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting dialogue. Even if it's so far away, it's part of the same conversation. But just to like come back to our dialogue with Villa Romana, how long have you been collaborating with Villa Romana on your own personal projects and the project with Black History Month, and if you want to mention some of those projects?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I first came in, I knew of Villa Romana since I had arrived here, but I have to say I didn't really, I was not somebody that explored the contemporary art spaces of the city all that much. There was something, my experiences were not super pleasant, and so I stopped going to openings. I'm somebody who's very interested in a critical dialogue and exchange, and that was not what was happening at openings. There wasn't a conversation about art most of the time, and that's actually true a lot of times now. And I have to say that the first time I was invited to come up to Villa Romana, I was happily surprised that the kind of conversation that was happening in that space was real. And it was happened through a curator named Giacomo Bazzani, who invited me to be part of an exhibition called Rotte Metropolitane, which was an exploration of, the metropolitan city of Florence through artists and people making work in that space. Giacomo Bazzani is probably the first person to ever consider me an Italian artist, which is kind of interesting. And, he also kind of tangled, no offense to Giacomo, but he kind of tangled my dialogue with colonial history in a way that was confusing, coming from a space like the United States that is still colonized, right? And so like, it was sort of confusing to be considered a colonial subject, right, in this space. But what's interesting is actually the very first showing that I did with them, I actually showed a version of this video installed atop this very sculpture that you see here. And so there's this magical way that this work was actually really also a first chance for me to explore the context of Italy, the context of Florence that I was interested in through my work in this idea of reinterpreting the urban space. And that's the language that really led me into a lot of that. We worked later through an exhibition that was curated by Andrew Smaldone, who's an artist originally from Nashville, Tennessee, who has been based here in Florence since '99. That was called The Job Ain't Nothing But Work. And it brought me together with my absolute mentor and one of my best friends in this world, Kevin Jerome Everson, who was my cinematography teacher. And we put together an exhibition about work, about the labor of teaching, the labor of art, the labor of music, the labor of everything, right? That experience was sort of another really magical opportunity. And Villa Romana, since then, I have to say it's probably one of the only institutions in the entire country that has consistently invited me under multiple guises. So they've invited me as an artist. They've involved me in their projects nationally, internationally as an artist. And then they've invited me and involved me as a researcher. They've invited me as a curator. And that form of collaboration that appreciates and embraces all of these layers that represent my approach to research is something that I'm extremely grateful for, because it's something that's rare. A lot of people are very interested in one of those facets and not all of them, But I think that, ultimately the leading into Black History Month Florence, once Black History Month Florence was founded by myself together with Andre Halyard, who's a Queens native who has been here in Florence for about 30 years. I think that what happened was that there was an opportunity to really think about the international environment that Villa Romana is, and the fact that every year we have a new community that we get to spend time with, that we get to dialogue with, that we get to open our views towards the world with, right? And all of that is so magical for me that it's sort of natural also to think about the ways in which the relationship between Villa Romana and archives and doing and research-based artwork, right, grew into sort of a natural partnership on a project like Black Archive Alliance, in projects that excavate a certain kind of narration that is buried in the archive, but is there, right? And sometimes it's not even that buried. And then ultimately, I think that, just over the years, the fact that I think that sometimes it's even these little informal collaborations that we don't really know how to define. And it's about the fact that I think Villa Romana recognizes that the work that we're doing is when we use the language in my biography of DIY, this is work that it's not following some sort of really strategic chart or plan. It's never had administrative funding in 6 years of operation. It's entirely constructed on relationships, dialogues, and exchanges with people that actually care about expanding vision and culture. And so I think that the fact that Villa Romana is one of these few institutions that really recognizes all of that, the informal exchanges of, Black History Month Florence has this artist who's coming to town, can you host them? We don't have the money to host them. Can you host them, right? These are these beautiful informal exchanges that allow the communities that we bring together to come right in contact with the communities that they bring together. And it's these magical synergies that for me are so powerful here. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can stop the share if you want. I mean, I have other images, but it's fine. If you want, I'll scan really quickly through.
Yeah, why don't you just
some of them. I mean, these are like, responses to thinking about Resignification was an exhibition that came up in 2015 through New York University, looking at blackamoors, which are this form of sculpture that's happening mainly from the late 1600s in Venice to represent Black Africans as servants and as objects of servitude, so tables, coat hangers. And this is this is maybe 2007. It was an exploration that I was doing of this form in dialogue with like the sort of break-in of hip hop, right, and breakdance and sort of this kind of language. Pietà, when you were talking earlier about 2020 and the violence of George Floyd, that's a violence that is around us at all times. And if you grow up in the United States, there's a way in which the violence that you experience just through growth and interaction with society is real. It's really real. And I think that the ways in which we narrate that violence also in this space. So, when we look at the monumentality of Florence and the monuments of the city, those are images that represent violence absolutely explicitly. That's why people are wearing armor. That's why we're looking at, aggressions that are taking place. Like there's no filter there. That's absolutely explicit, but we stopped looking at it that way. This work, Pietà, was actually really looking at, it was looking at the Pietà through a lens that I think is very fitting with what you were just saying, because the Pietà is an image of Mary holding her dead son. And there's a way in which there's an injection into that sculpture of a mother who knows that her son is going to die. And when we think about that through the lens of all the violence that has met Afro-descendant peoples in this world, and that sort of knowledge that this violence is a real possibility, right? But the care that we put into raising our kids and care that we put into growing ourselves, right? That's some of what I was trying to do here. This is at a place just outside of Florence in the country. I found a Toyota truck and I was like, all right, Toyota truck, perfect. And so it was about sewing this form as a form of care, only to have it then, dragged away by this truck. So in a certain sense, it was about a lynching, but it's about the lynching that's sort of inherent in the Pietà and the ways in which we might not appreciate that language if we don't look through it through that lens, right? So these are just maybe a few examples of the ways in which the research that I'm engaged in and have always been engaged in is absolutely central to thinking through what this space of Italy, this space of Florence means, and all of the ways in which it needs to re-narrate itself.
Thank you. On that note, we have a couple of questions from the audience. I'm seeing George's question, but since Amy is asking a question that seems to be kind of connected with what you were talking about right now, just like last minute, maybe we're gonna read that first. So Amy's asking, has the Black Lives Matter movement affected Black History Month in 2021? And if so, how? Is there more interest in the event from Italians?
That's a good question. I think it's an important one to sort of maybe also break down a little bit, because I think I've been in contact with a really wonderful group of really young activists who were inspired by the events and protests of summer 2020. And they formed Black Lives Matter Rome as a chapter. And they've been involved in trying to reach out to other chapters of Black Lives Matter across Italy to sort of create a sense of solidarity, collectivity, and, I think also of advocacy, right? And they reached out to me, even though what we represent is not exactly Black Lives Matter, for dialogue. And so I've been engaged in this dialogue and it's been really rich. But I think that one of the things that I really like to make sure keeps really present is that that Black Lives Matter, of course, predates anybody stating that, right? So of course, in the entire history of the United States, but also all of the oppression of Afro-descendant peoples, that Black Lives Matter is sort of an understated fact that we all appreciate. And I think that, with the murder of George Floyd, there's a lot of ways that in Italy and in Europe, people understand the Black Lives Matter movement as being born in that moment. And I think it's really important to back it up to at least the emergence of those very words around Trayvon Martin And the fact that, you know, we were already in an international world. Italy was already looking at Trayvon Martin and thinking about what that signified. There were already Black Italians here who were thinking about the violences that they were met with, the lack of access to citizenship, the ways in which the migration crisis was flattening any individual narrative that was possible. And so I think that, you know, when we back it up like that, there's a way in which the work that we're doing around Black History Month has always been conscious of these things. And Black Lives Matter, what it certainly did in this context was to wake a lot of people up to the fact that other narrations were not only possible, but they were necessary. And I think that is something, that sense of urgency. I think, you know, with our project that we did, the first version of On Being Present at the Uffizi, which opened in January of 2020, as a reflection, quite simply, of the institution looking at itself, right? And looking at these narrations that simply were not in the way in which they talked about the paintings that are already present in the collection. And there's a way in which, with that project, when George Floyd was murdered, a lot of people began to wake up to the significance of the kind of simple acknowledgement of presence that we were engaging in. And there's a way in which then that affected everything that came after it in that context. But, you know, I think, you know, these are perceptions of violence, perceptions of around the discourse that needs to happen in Italy in relation to itself that predate and will go way beyond the movement. So there's a big effect. I think that the biggest effect is that, you know, the media is very lazy here. And the words Black Lives Matter tend to signify a very specific thing to the Italian media, and hence to the Italian people that read the Italian media. And I think that sense of specificity and lack of historical context makes it difficult to sort of detether the specificity of the Italian context and everything that's happening here from a simple solidarity with the United States and everything that's happening there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this contribution. And I'd just like to ask to Angelica Stocken about Villa Romana and other future projects, if there is something in the right future. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, I mean, we are going on as we always did at the moment under somehow difficult Corona conditions, but we will have a next exhibition after the Fellows one, which is on now by Jeremiah Day, an American artist performer who has been collaborating with Simone Forti, quite famous performance artist from the American 70s. And he came already for a workshop last year, and now end of April we are installing a kind of archive of his performances and an additional space for, let's say, future actions and future performances, space for possibilities. And then we will have a small exhibition in the pavilion again by an artist who stayed here as a guest artist last year, Robert Gabris. We are collaborating since last year and this year again with the European Roma Culture Institution and hosting 2 Roma artists for 2 months each. And Robert will come back and show his also kind of performative installation he developed here during his residency. And then the next step will be in summer again to conceive a 2nd edition of Scuola Popolare. That was our reaction last year after the very, very hard lockdown in Italy and the many deaths and the trauma where a lot of people have been going through. And as I said before, we do have this garden. We invited activists, artists from the region to propose projects which could work in a collaborative way, not in a confrontational, not so much giving a lecture or showing objects, but reflecting together to meet and yeah, also to enjoy again the possibility to be close to each other. Of course, this year's experience is different. We are living with 1 year of Corona, and we don't know what proposals will arrive, but last year we had almost 80 proposals. We could realize only a third of it, but it was a very strong experience. Of course, just in Black History Month, participated too with a wonderful series of 5 meetings, and that will happen in July this year, for example, but of course, then we will continue.
Thank you. I'll post your website link so everyone can check it out for future events.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's well, it's kind of wonderful that even though we have to meet through Zoom, like, you know, there is a perspective of a summer and places like Villa Romana in which things are happening in person, social distancing, and, you know, you can be in proximity of people again, which is something that I'm very much looking forward to personally. So just if there's more questions, we will share contacts for Villa Romana and for the Black History Month Florence. So everybody from the audience is welcome to reach out to them and know more about their work. Just like quickly, I think George was asking, I missed it, but did you mention where and when the mannequin that you work on is from? I suppose it's a question for Justin, the mannequin. So.
Yeah. No, I didn't mention. Actually, the specificity of the label just says the Dervish Army. So there's actually really there's not such an extensive description, but it's housed in the Ethnographic Museum, which is a space that I've initiated a lot of different work with, and I think there's so much work to be done in that space. It's sort of a really incredible opportunity to think about history because of the ways in which it's remained unchanged since its creation virtually. I mean, there's a little bit of change, but very little change. And so you get a glimpse of the perception and the ways in which this was designed to be presented to the audience and the colonial lens that comes with that. And that particular object, I need to do more research into also myself. That was a very immediate response at the time that I think definitely merits another return, which is part of the research that I'm doing with the Italian Council. So the current project that I'm working on right now, which is called Minted in Enemy Bronze, is in dialogue with a range of historical sites across Florence and across Italy, looking at a whole range of different ways of thinking about Afro-descendant cultures and peoples and their significance in this history. And then also about sharing these spaces that have historic resonance with people that I like to exchange with, that I like to collaborate with. And it's a way of thinking about the conversations and informal exchanges we have that are non-performative as actual, like, you know, labor, as work, and potentially, you know, framed through the lens of a really experimental form of research.
Awesome. Thank you for more information about that. And so we're like at the time where we can wrap this up. Thanks everybody for being here, Angelica and Justin. And again, the Italian Cultural Center and the Rochester Center, the Italian Cultural Center, the Rochester Center. Yeah. Just so you know, please come back. We have other 2 appointments in March 21st and April 18. With next one would be with La Portineria, which is a new gallery space in Florence, very interesting. And then with Iranian artist Zoe Cinel. So come back and learn more about artists living in Florence. The registration and the info will be again on the Italian Cultural Center website. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. If anyone has an additional question, we're happy to take more questions. You can just feel free to unmute and ask your question. And if not, I mean, in the meantime, again, I would like to thank Justin and Angelica for being with us today, and for the, you know, for the work you do and the essential dialogues and exchanges that you create and promote, and that, which are definitely something we, as, you know, a cultural center as well, we want to promote as well and continue. I would also like to thank Giulia and Zoe for curating this series, and as well as the Rochester Art Center, which I invite everyone in Minnesota to go and visit. It's open. And yes, we look forward to the next appointment. And again, thank you to everyone for being with us today, to everyone from Minnesota. And I think we have some people from Italy as well. Okay. Grazie a tutti. So are there any questions? Nope. All right. Well, I wish a beautiful day to everyone.
There's a question.
I have a question. Hi, sorry, but yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, Justin, I heard you speak a lot about like sort of the laziness of the media in Italy, and how they're sort of covering and discussing the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was wondering, you know, as I'm a member of the media here, and I was kind of wondering what, like in what ways you experience this sort of, I don't know, like laziness, or sort of perhaps like not explaining the ideas that are at hand in terms of colonialization and structural racism. And so, yeah, I was just wondering from your perspective as an artist in Italy and the media, because I've also heard too, like.
Sure. No, thank you so much for that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's no knock on media in the sense of like everybody needs to get out, but I think it's you know, and I think there's a way in the context of the United States and predominantly there's a whole lot of conversations around like fake news that have complicated the role of media. But I think what I'm speaking to is not exactly framed in that way. It's more, and honestly, I've always had this critique going on, and it seems to get worse and worse the deeper I get into press conferences and the announcement of the work that we're doing, the sharing of our labor, right? And what happens is that I see, because I create this statement that goes out, the ways in which that, like, just the highlighted words are taken, and a lot of times it's full of erroneous information. And the errors are due to a lack of time that's invested in actually doing any form of research about what we're actually talking to. And so people are encountering these things for the first time and having to mediate for an audience that also maybe doesn't know these things, but there's not that minimal amount of time that's taken to really look at what something represents. And there's a lot of just the taking of the headlines and flipping it around that, you know, I think that it in the context of Italy, I think people don't recognize how damaging that can actually be. Meaning that when something is miscommunicated in dialogue with Afro-descendant people and Afro-descendant cultures here, the people that get the brunt of that and the people that are met with potential protest and violence are Black people. And so in the context of miscommunication in regards to something like the Uffizi is not going to come under attack. I'm going to come under attack in order for, you know, maybe some people who have misinterpreted the message to defend the Uffizi and their patrimony. So I think that there's that sense of the sensitivity that's involved in this work and the complexity of the language, the specificity of the language that is really lacking. And that lack of sensitivity overall is something that unfortunately is really widespread here. And I think that it's because people aren't thinking about the implications of words and the sensitivity of the subject matter.
Thank you, Alicia, for your great question, and thank you, Justin. Yeah, anyone else? Just feel free to unmute and ask your question directly. All right, so I think we're come to the conclusion of this presentation and conversation. Again, thank you so much to everyone, and yeah, we look forward to the next one And make sure when you're during your next visit to Italy, make sure to go visit Justin and Angelica at Villa Romana. We're all looking forward to that too. Thank you all. Ciao. Arrivederci.
Ciao.